A loud party was going on inside the house. Music blasted from the speakers, and laughter filled the air. The man stood outside, staring at the scene before him. His wife had told him she wouldn't be celebrating her birthday, yet here she was, dancing with friends, completely lost in the moment. His heart sank. Why had she lied? They had been together for 6 months, and he had trusted her. Pushing the door open, he called out her name, but she didn't hear him over the loud music. Frustration boiled inside him as he marched toward her, grabbing her hand. She turned, smiling sweetly at first, but her expression changed the moment she saw his face. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice calm but indifferent. He frowned. "I thought you said you weren't celebrating. So what is this? Why did you lie to me?" She scoffed. "It wasn't my idea. My friends planned this. And anyway, you don't have the money to throw me a party, do you?" Her words stung. He had spent months saving up, sacrificing his own needs to get her a special birthday present. Working as a delivery man was exhausting, but he did it to provide for her. Yet here she was, dismissing his efforts as if they meant nothing. As he looked around, he realized something was off. The apartment, which he had paid for, looked completely different. The walls were repainted, expensive furniture replaced the old ones, and a huge home theater system had been set up. He didn't remember buying any of this. The people in the room barely acknowledged him. To them, he was just a poor delivery man. A woman sneered, "Who let this guy in? Is this really your husband?" Another guest, a well-dressed man, entered the house, and his wife's eyes lit up. She rushed to his side, holding his hand naturally. The man frowned. Who was this guy, and why was she acting so familiar with him? Holding back his anger, he stepped forward, holding out the small box he had worked so hard to buy. "Happy birthday," he said with a smile. She stared at the gift, then tossed it aside without hesitation. "Are you deaf? Can't you see what's happening?" The room fell silent. His heart clenched. He had never felt so humiliated. The rich man smirked. "You told me you broke up with him already. I said I didn't want to see him here." He turned to his wife, hoping this was some kind of mistake, but she simply looked away. "Wow," a woman laughed. "Did he seriously save up his salary just to buy that cheap gift?" The rich man stepped closer. "Tell you what, if you lick my shoe, I'll give you a job as a security guard at my company. You'll earn more money than you ever have in your life." Laughter erupted around the room. His wife didn't even defend him. He clenched his fists. Was this really the woman he had sacrificed so much for? The protagonist watched as the woman he loved chose another man, leaving him heartbroken and betrayed. She introduced her new partner, who mocked the protagonist with arrogance, offering him a humiliating job. Their words stung, but the protagonist refused to show weakness. When the insults became unbearable, he lashed out, landing a punch before fleeing. Chased by guards, he ran until he found a hiding spot, barely escaping. As he wandered the streets, sorrow and frustration weighed on him. He had given everything to the woman he loved, yet she discarded him so easily. Seeking solace, he entered a bar, bought several drinks, and drank alone outside, trying to drown his pain. However, the alcohol only deepened his despair. Eventually, he lost consciousness. Meanwhile, a powerful man, frustrated with the situation, spotted the unconscious protagonist and saw an opportunity. He ordered his men to take the protagonist to a room where a woman was sleeping. Following his instructions, they placed him beside her before leaving. Hours later, the protagonist woke up, confused by his surroundings. As he turned, he accidentally touched someone. Instantly, he was met with a slap and an enraged scream. A woman sat beside him, demanding to know what had happened. Stunned, the protagonist struggled to understand how he ended up in this unfamiliar place with a stranger. A young man woke up with a pounding headache, his memory blurred from drinking the night before. He found himself in an unfamiliar bed next to a distressed woman who had no idea how he ended up there. Before they could make sense of the situation, a man barged in, smirking as he accused the woman of being with other men. She tried to defend herself, but he had already sent a photo of them to his powerful grandfather. Panic overtook her as she realized the consequences she would face. Just then, the old man arrived, his disappointment evident. He accused the woman of breaking the family's rules and, without listening to her pleas, made a shocking decision, declaring the young man as her future husband. Stunned, the young man protested, but the old man refused to believe him. In a fit of anger, he ordered his men to beat him. Blows rained down on the young man, leaving him bruised and coughing blood. As he lay on the floor in pain, the accuser mocked him, reminding the woman of an upcoming party where she would have to appear with her husband. Before leaving, she bitterly told him that she hated him for ruining her life and warned him to show up or her grandfather would make things worse. Left alone with one of the guards, the young man struggled to stand. His body ached, and blood dripped from his mouth. As exhaustion took over, a dark thought crossed his mind. Maybe it was better if he didn't survive this. The protagonist struggled to regain balance, feeling dizzy as he pulled on his trousers. A man guided him to a car, and before he knew it, he was home. Stepping outside, a strange sense of peace washed over him. The pain in his body faded, replaced by a burning determination. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His past was a mystery, and he was determined to uncover it. Dressed in a black suit, bought after months of saving, the protagonist arrived at a grand party with a woman who barely acknowledged him. The stark contrast between their worlds was evident. She was wealthy, and he was seen as nothing. When they entered, a man was immediately hostile, questioning his presence. Another relative joined in, ridiculing him for being a mere son-in-law in a powerful family, treating him as lower than a servant. Their scorn only fueled his anger, but before he could react, a commanding voice silenced the crowd. A powerful and respected man observed him with keen interest. While others mocked, this man seemed intrigued, especially when his gaze landed on the protagonist's ring. The same ring was his only possession from before his time in the orphanage. Just as the protagonist was about to be thrown out, the powerful man intervened, stopping his guards and asking for a private meeting. Confused but cautious, the protagonist followed. Inside a secluded room, the man asked to see the ring. Reluctantly, he handed it over. The inscription on the ring made the man's body shudder in shock. The protagonist stared at the man before him, trying to recall if they had ever met. But no matter how hard he tried, the face remained unfamiliar. His confusion deepened when the man suddenly dropped to his knees, addressing him with deep respect. The words that followed left him stunned. He was being called the successor of someone named Hercules. For years, the protagonist had no memory of his past, only knowing that he was found and raised in an orphanage. But now, hearing this, fragments of lost memories flickered in his mind. He saw a vision, an older man walking beside a boy who looked just like him. The memory was hazy, but it felt real. When he heard that his father had died, the weight of it nearly crushed him. He had a father, and he was gone. As Alfred continued speaking, pieces of the past came rushing back. His father had been a close friend of a powerful businessman, and together, they had built an empire. But betrayal had shattered everything. The protagonist recalled the night of the attack, the moment his father was gunned down before his eyes. He had been shot too, left for dead. Yet somehow he survived. Now he wanted answers. He demanded to know about an old ally, only to learn that he had also been killed. Everything he once had was taken from him. And now he realized if his true identity were exposed, those who had destroyed his past would come for him again. The protagonist couldn't believe his eyes. It was a check for $100 million. The unexpected amount left him speechless. A man told him he might need it until he could return to his rightful place. Meanwhile, outside, a woman anxiously waited, worried about what was happening inside. Two men mocked the protagonist, assuming he was being dealt with. They even joked about him not living long enough to enjoy his marriage. The woman's heart pounded as she listened, fearing the worst. Just as the men continued their cruel remarks, the door opened, and to everyone's shock, the protagonist walked out completely unharmed, accompanied by a powerful figure. The room fell silent as disbelief spread across their faces. One of the men cursed under his breath, unable to comprehend why the protagonist was still standing. The powerful figure then introduced the protagonist as the son of a friend, further shocking everyone. The men struggled to understand how someone they looked down upon could be connected to such an influential person. As the celebration continued, doubts and suspicions filled the air. They questioned the protagonist's background, trying to convince themselves that he was not truly important. Meanwhile, the protagonist's memories resurfaced. He recalled his past, the loss of his father and a close ally. Despite being shot multiple times, he had survived, and now he had to stay hidden. The woman, acting indifferent, coldly told him to be careful if he valued his life. But beneath her words, emotions stirred, leaving the night full of unanswered questions. The protagonist sat in silence, sipping his drink, lost in thoughts of the people he had lost. He barely engaged in conversation, his mind weighed down by grief. The atmosphere was tense, and an argument broke out, but he controlled his emotions, even when provoked. At the end of the party, the woman accompanying him refused to return home with him, expressing her frustration. She reminded him that their marriage was not by choice and questioned how he had even ended up in her life. Despite his attempts to reason with her, she dismissed him and left, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He stared at his ring, wondering how things might have been different. The next morning, the blaring alarm jolted him awake, causing him to fall from the bed. His dreams were haunted by memories of his father and a trusted companion. The pain of their absence was sharp, but he knew he had responsibilities to uphold. His father's empire and the hidden power it held needed his leadership. Though he questioned why the truth had been kept from him, he was determined to take control. However, he had to maintain a low profile, posing as a mere delivery worker to hide his identity. Arriving at work, he was met with taunts from a coworker but ignored them. Soon, he was summoned to the boss's office, where he was confronted about his absence. Before he could explain, the boss fired him, calling him useless. Suspecting someone had influenced this decision, he demanded his rightful pay, but the boss refused and called his men to throw him out. Facing 8 men, the protagonist held his ground. As they attacked, he skillfully dodged and countered, taking them down one by one. His fighting skills left the boss shocked. Seizing the moment, he grabbed the boss's hand and twisted it, forcing him into submission. The boss, now terrified, begged for mercy and promised to write him a check. With a smirk, the protagonist released him, watching as he scrambled to comply. The protagonist never imagined stepping into a place like Weathervane, one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. But before the grand dinner, he indulged in a simple pleasure, a pizza delivery. With his newfound financial freedom, he no longer had to hold back on small joys. However, memories of his past struggles surfaced, as he recalled how he used to save every penny for someone special's birthday. After a brief rest, he prepared for the evening, dressing in his best clothes, though he knew they weren't suitable for such an upscale place. Taking a cab, he soon arrived at the restaurant and admired its grandeur. But as he approached the entrance, a waiter suddenly blocked his path, questioning his presence. Mocking his attire, the waiter refused to let him in, assuming he was a penniless intruder. The protagonist, though angered, remained composed and called Alfred, who assured him that as the boss, he didn't need a reservation. However, the waiter continued to insult him, unwilling to believe he belonged there. Things escalated when a familiar couple appeared, an arrogant man and a woman who once meant something to him. They ridiculed his presence, convinced he was there to beg for help. The protagonist calmly stated that he was invited by Alfred, but they refused to believe him, laughing at his supposed desperation. Just as their taunts grew louder, the tension in the air signaled that something unexpected was about to happen. The protagonist remained calm despite the annoying remarks from the man nearby. Just then, a luxury car pulled up and a powerful businessman stepped out. He was a well-known figure in the city, leading both a major clothing brand and an underground organization. The protagonist was surprised to see him, unsure of the reason behind their meeting. As tension filled the air, another man, who had arranged the meeting, arrived and was furious upon learning that the protagonist had been denied entry. He immediately fired the waiter responsible, leaving the staff in shock. The protagonist noticed the stunned expressions on the faces of those who had looked down on him moments ago. The waiter pleaded desperately to keep his job, but his fate was already decided. Inside the restaurant, they were led to a VIP area where high-end wines were discussed and selected for the occasion. The businessman, with a commanding presence, observed the protagonist closely, as if evaluating his worth. They entered an elegantly furnished private room, and the protagonist sensed the authority the businessman carried. The conversation soon turned serious. The organizer revealed that the protagonist was connected to a powerful lineage, though currently keeping a low profile. As expensive wines were poured, the businessman remained skeptical, questioning why someone else was speaking on the protagonist's behalf. His tone carried a hint of challenge, as if testing the protagonist's ability to stand his ground. The protagonist steps forward with confidence, asserting his right to claim his position despite his long absence. His bold declaration is met with skepticism, especially from a man unwilling to accept him as a leader. Tension rises as the two exchange words, leading to a challenge. If the protagonist loses, he must walk away from his claim. Without hesitation, he accepts the duel. The fight takes place in a secluded boxing club, with only a witness present. The opponent, known for his strength, underestimates the protagonist's skills. As the match begins, the opponent attacks with swift, powerful strikes, but the protagonist evades them effortlessly. His movements are calculated, his training evident in every dodge and counterattack. He lands a precise blow, causing the opponent to stumble but not surrender. With a final, decisive move, the protagonist ends the fight, proving his superiority. The opponent, once doubtful, acknowledges his strength and accepts him as the rightful leader. Before the moment of triumph can settle, the protagonist receives a call, urgent and unsettling. His in-laws have returned, and they are aware of everything. He is summoned immediately, with a warning laced in cold resentment. The sudden turn of events shifts the atmosphere as the protagonist realizes new troubles await. As he prepares for the confrontation, his allies discuss the next steps, ensuring that his presence remains unnoticed until the right moment. With plans forming in the background, the protagonist walks forward, ready to face what comes next. The protagonist agreed to take a cab and promised to visit a company the next day in search of a job. Before leaving, he was gifted an expensive bottle of wine, worth $1 million, to present to his in-laws. Holding it carefully, he thanked the giver and left. As he arrived at the large house, nervousness gripped him. Taking a deep breath, he finally stepped inside. Inside, a couple sat on the sofa. Their resemblance to the woman he was about to marry made it clear they were her parents. He greeted them politely and offered the expensive wine. The man studied it with curiosity, but the woman scoffed, suspecting it was either fake or stolen. Her words stung, but the protagonist remained silent, knowing no explanation would convince them otherwise. The situation escalated when she accused him of trying to bribe them after what had happened with their daughter. She even called him a thief. Despite his attempts to clarify, she continued to insult him, assuming he had taken advantage of her daughter to escape poverty. Holding back his frustration, he stayed silent, unwilling to argue. The man, noticing his patience, intervened and asked him to sit. After discussing the misunderstanding, it was made clear that the marriage would happen. However, the protagonist was questioned about his job. He admitted he had just been fired, and the man warned that he must find stable work to be considered worthy of marrying their daughter. The protagonist agreed. As he turned to leave, the woman lashed out again, questioning how a poor man like him could be so confident. Turning back, he met her gaze with determination. With a smile, he asked if she would give him a chance to prove himself by securing a good job. The man couldn't help but laugh at the boldness in front of him, finding it amusing. The woman, however, was skeptical, challenging him to prove himself. With confidence, the protagonist smiled, knowing he had already arranged everything. Leaving behind the doubtful stares, he wandered deeper into the house, searching for a place to rest for the night. Relying on instinct and overheard conversations, he found a door and knocked. As soon as it opened, the woman inside almost slammed it shut in his face, but he swiftly avoided it. Anger flared in her eyes, and her face, swollen from past tears, showed her frustration. She demanded to know why he was there, and he simply stated he needed a place to sleep. She scoffed at the idea, reminding him of the trouble he had caused. Her resentment was clear. He had ruined everything for her. She shut the door with force, leaving him to find another place to stay. With no other option, he settled in the servants' quarters and quickly fell asleep. Morning arrived, and as he stepped out, he encountered the same skeptical stares. The man mocked him, amused by his choice of sleeping arrangements. The woman laughed, dismissing him as a mere servant. Ignoring them, he hurried out, heading home to freshen up before making his way to the company. Upon arrival, he was immediately blocked by security at the order of someone determined to belittle him. Just as things escalated, a woman appeared, introducing herself as an assistant to a powerful figure. She dismissed the guards and led him inside, presenting him with a list of job options. The man examined the list carefully, but he couldn't ignore the cold glare from the secretary, who looked at him as if he were beneath her. He paid no attention to her attitude, focusing instead on the list, where he noticed some positions were marked with stars. When he questioned her about it, she explained that those positions were already occupied. However, he confidently declared that he would take the role of manager. The secretary, visibly displeased, tried to challenge him, questioning if he planned to demote someone. But he stood firm, reminding her that she had given him the list, meaning it was up to him to choose. Realizing she had no choice, she agreed, stating that his office would be ready by the next day. After leaving the company, he exhaled in relief, knowing he would need new suits and possibly a better phone to match his new position. However, this meant using the money given to him. Returning home, he found his in-laws present, meaning he would once again have to stay elsewhere for the night. He planned to withdraw money from the bank where he was well known, though not in a good way. People there looked down on him, treating him as someone insignificant. Upon arriving at the bank, he was immediately met with mockery from Peter, a banker who always enjoyed belittling him. Peter and a colleague laughed at the idea that he had come to withdraw a large sum. When he insisted on seeing the manager, Peter decided to check the check first. Moments later, he announced that no account could be found, claiming it was a fake. Smirking, he tore the check into pieces, humiliating the man further.